In 1093, Scottish King Malcolm III led a daring invasion of England, expecting an easy victory and territorial gains. What happened instead was a lopsided ambush that left both the king and his son dead and plunged Scotland into a chaotic succession crisis. Malcolm III wasn't just another Scottish king invading England, he was an existential threat. He had a very powerful claim to the English throne while simultaneously sitting on the Stone of Scone. When people talk about 1066, they sometimes label it the Year of the Three Kings. Edward the Confessor died in January, Harold Godwinson claimed the crown, then William killed Harold and took the throne for himself. But that Year of the Three Kings title comes with an asterisk. You can make a lukewarm argument there was a fourth king crowbarred in there, Edgar Atheling. The Anglo-Saxon Witan, the country's ruling council, elected Atheling as king following Harold Godwinson's death. He was the last surviving male member of the House of Wessex and had a strong blood claim to the throne. Technically, this argument is weak because although elected to the role, he was never coronated. He also, even though he was only 14 or 15 years old at the time, wasn't stupid. He knew he lacked the military power to resist William. Before a coronation could take place, Edgar and his supporters submitted to William at Berkhamsted in December 1066. William was crowned shortly afterwards. Were the story to end there, Atheling would simply be the answer to a pub trivia question. Once William became king, he knew that there was a non-zero chance that he'd end up executed or in prison because he was the ultimate loose end. So he fled the country and he went to Scotland. There, his sister Margaret was married to the king, Malcolm III. Now you can begin to see why Malcolm III invading the country in 1093 was an existential threat to William the Conqueror's son, William Rufus. Malcolm's marriage to Margaret, the sister of Edgar Atheling, the last male claimant of the House of Wessex, provided a powerful symbolic and legitimate link to the pre-conquest English throne. Because even if you weren't convinced that Malcolm should get it, after all his claim would come via his wife, their child, Edward, had a rock-solid one. So when Malcolm and his son Edward crossed the border leading a large army, you could cut the political tension with a claymore. Worse, Malcolm III was an experienced warrior. His Gaelic nickname, Canmore, meant Great Chief or Big Head, and in 1093 he had every reason to feel confident. He'd been ruling Scotland for 35 years. If you're familiar with Shakespeare's Macbeth, then you know that Canmore's father, Duncan I, was murdered. Malcolm spent years in exile before coming back to avenge his dad. He killed Macbeth in 1057. And then was pretty brutal about ensuring he didn't exit stage left the way his own dad had. The English king at the time, William II, William Rufus, was the son of William the Conqueror, and you could say that they had had a tense father-son relationship. Not only that, but William II had to put down his own internal rebellion just shortly after taking the throne in 1088. He showed excellent mettle in holding on to the country and holding on to his power base. However, that had caused its own issues. Malcolm, from north of the border, had looked at the situation and thought he fancied his own chances. So in 1091, he'd already made a first attempt at trying to push south with an army. Rufus had had to march an enormous army north to put him back in his place. On seeing the superior force, Malcolm had sued for a truce. The next year, Rufus decided to solidify his grip on the north. He added additional fortifications at Carlisle and elsewhere in order to prevent the Scottish from pulling the same stunt again. The final insult came when William Rufus demanded that Malcolm formally submit to him as a vassal. For a proud king who'd forged his own destiny, that was a step too far. He refused. The truce was broken. War was inevitable. And so, in the autumn of 1093, Malcolm gathered a second army. This wasn't just another border raid, this was a full-scale invasion, the peak of his life's ambition, with him and his son at the head. This was a dynastic statement. The invasion wasn't just for land, but for the future of his royal house. The Scottish army marched south into Northumbria and, according to the chronicles, left a trail of absolute destruction behind them. Their target was Alnwick, a key strategic point for controlling the region. Now, the formidable stone castle we know today wasn't quite there yet. It was likely still being built. Malcolm was probably laying siege to the town at this point, or a simple earlier castle that was on the site at the time. His army was large, and they were confident. They set up their camp about 3/4 of a mile north of the town and settled in for what they believed would be a straightforward siege. The Earl of Northumbria, the man supposed to be defending this northern frontier, was known to only have a small force. The Scots were spread out, their guard was down, and their king was exposed. This overconfidence, this belief that the English were too weak to put up a fight, would prove to be the Scottish king's undoing. They'd come to lay siege. They were completely unprepared for the battle that was about to find them. Now into our story enters another key player, Robert de Mowbray, the Norman Earl of Northumbria. Mowbray was in a tough spot. He was responsible for defending the border, but simply didn't have enough men to face the Scottish army in an open battle, and a direct fight would have been suicide. But Mowbray was a clever and a ruthless commander. If he couldn't win on strength, he would have to win on cunning. He came up with a plan that was as audacious as it was brilliant, a surprise attack that was aimed not at the Scottish army, but directly at its head. On November the 13th, 1093, St. Brice's Day, Mowbray put his plan into action. He gathered a small, elite force of highly skilled English knights. This wasn't a clumsy levy of peasant soldiers. Today, we would call them commandos or special forces. Using the landscape for cover, they completely bypassed the main scattered Scottish army. Their target was singular and specific, King Malcolm's personal guard. This was a surgical strike. Now the chronicles say that he was killed near a ford in the river, and the locals tell me it was near this spot right here. The attack was sudden, shocking, and brutally effective. The Scots were caught completely by surprise and their camp was thrown into chaos. Before the larger Scottish force even knew what was happening, the English knights crashed into the king's retinue. In the close quarters fighting that followed, both Malcolm and his son Edward were killed. The moment the king and his heir fell, the battle was over. Losing a king in battle is a catastrophe. Losing the king and his heir on the same day, almost unthinkable. For the Scottish army laying siege to Alnwick, the psychological impact was devastating. Their leadership was vaporized in an instant. There was no one left to give orders, no one to rally the troops, no one to explain what the new strategy was going to be. The Scottish army broke and it ran. What followed wasn't an organised retreat, but a desperate, chaotic flight back to Scotland. The great campaign had ended in a bloody, humiliating rout. Back in Scotland, another of Malcolm's sons, Edgar, brought the terrible news to his mother, Queen Margaret. Already in poor health, the story goes that she died just 3 days later, reportedly from grief. Now Scotland's position was extremely precarious. It had lost the king, his heir, and its queen, all within days. It caused a chaotic succession crisis. The old tradition where a brother could take the throne clashed with the newer model of the eldest son inheriting. Malcolm's brother, Donald III, also known as Donald Bane, seized the opportunity and the throne. A fierce traditionalist, Donald represented a backlash against the Anglo-Norman influence of Malcolm's court. This ushered in a period of instability and civil war as Malcolm's surviving sons all fought to reclaim their birthright. All this turmoil, of course, was a gift to William Rufus, who now faced a weak and divided Scotland unable to threaten his borders. England's control over Northumbria and Cumbria was now secure. But what about the man who engineered it all, Robert de Mowbray? You'd think he'd be celebrated, but his story takes a turn. Just 2 years later, in 1095, his ambition got the better of him. He joined a conspiracy to overthrow King William Rufus himself. The rebellion failed and de Mowbray was stripped of his titles, his marriage was annulled, and he was imprisoned for the rest of his life. But that is a story for another time. The 1093 First Battle of Alnwick, a decapitatory little piece of the past. This is Malcolm's Cross. It's about a mile outside of town. As you can see, I'm in the woods. It's not especially hard to find. It's also not particularly well maintained, unfortunately. And most guidebooks and leaflets that you'll see will tell you this is the spot where Malcolm III and his son Edward were ambushed. In actual fact, it's not, but I'd be remiss if I didn't bring you here to show you it anyway. It's actually an 18th century replica and was moved here at some stage in the past. When it was moved, it was broken, and you can find on the floor next to it a piece of the original. For the actual spot where the local law says Malcolm and his son were killed, you have to go to another part of town and then head out an equal distance in a different direction. Now, if you do this walk, you're going to want to stop here because there's a hole in the wall and there's a memorial talking about a Scottish king. That's the wrong one. That's the Second Battle of Alnwick, happening in 1174. For our place, we need to keep going. The locals tell me the non-tourists come to this spot here, just that rock there, as the marker for where Malcolm III and Edward both met their ends. Place whatever weight on that you wish to. It certainly fits the chronicles better, as it is right by a bridge and a fording point for the local river.